Welcome to part 8 in this series of videos creating a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. In this video, we will add the last of the pages to maintain lookup data, in this case products. This is going to follow the pattern that we use for tax rates and suppliers, but will have two small differences. We'll be adding a Syncfusion drop-down list to the product page to look up suppliers for that particular product. And in the data grid on the list of products, we will include data from two tables, i.e. from the product table and the supplier table. Anyway, we'll get started by looking at the SQL stored procedures. The page to maintain product records is going to follow the pattern established to maintain tax rates and suppliers. So we're going to alter the SQL stored procedures so that insert and update handle the prevention of duplicates, and the list for the data grid only includes non-archived records and returns them in a product code sequence. So to save a little bit of time here, I've pre-prepared the stored procedure so we can just run those. So we'll start off with product insert, and this follows exactly the same pattern as before. So we're checking for duplicates before a product is inserted. If a duplicate is found, then the transaction isn't committed. So let's parse it and execute it. That's fine. I'll repeat for product update. So we're checking for duplicates where the product code is the same as the product code being passed in. The supplier ID is the supplier ID being passed in. It's not archived, and where the product ID isn't the same as the product we're trying to update. I'm checking for duplicates here on code and supplier. This is because it is possible that two different suppliers could have the same product code. So let's run that fine, close that, and lastly we want the list, and this is just making sure that the product hasn't been archived. Now, I originally put a foreign key constraint on the product table pointing to the supplier table. Having this foreign key in place means that whenever a record is added to the product table, the product supplier ID column must be populated with a valid supplier ID from the supplier table. In hindsight, I've decided this is probably too restrictive. Allowing products to be created without being linked to a supplier would allow the system to be more flexible in that you don't have to have a particular supplier for a particular product. So I've got a script that will remove that, which is quite simple. It just says alter table product, drop the constraint if it exists of the foreign key. So I'll run that. And just as a byword, I also found this handy script to check for foreign keys. So making sure you've got purchase orders up there. This is not, we don't need to do this, but it's useful to see how it works. And it shows us the foreign keys that we've got existing. If you run this after you think you've deleted the foreign key, you should only have 3 here. So that's dealt with the SQL. We now need to look at the C# code and change the product service, the iProduct service, and then add the product page and change the navigation menu. So we'll have a look at that. And although I mentioned it last, the first thing I'm going to do is change the navigation menu because I always forget to do that and then wonder why I can't get to the page I've just created. So I'll copy this section for supplier paste it in and change. Save and close that. So the first thing we need to look at is the product service. In the same way as for tax rates and suppliers, we've changed the insert and the update, and we've changed it from being a Boolean to having an integer passed back to say whether we've been successful or not. So I'm going to delete the insert in its entirety. And again, in the interest of time, I've pre-prepared the code. So product insert, we're passing in those parameters, and we've got the parameters there and deciding whether, or reading whether the stored procedure returns success or not, i.e. 0. So that's for insert. I've done the same for update. So I'll remove that in its entirety and copy that in. So it follows exactly the same pattern. For the update, we do need the product ID and product is archived, which we don't need for the insert. So let's save that. The next one is the interface, the iProduct service. That's the code as created by Alan Simpson's code generator. And it's product insert and product update that we want to change. But to make life simple, I'm going to delete the lot. And mistake, is this bit I need to delete. Right, so we've now got the insert with the various parameters being passed in, and the same for product update. So let's save that. And the next item is to add the product page itself. I'm going to be particularly lazy here. I'm going to create a page and then copy and paste the entire code from supplier page into the product page. So right click, add, and it's a raised component. And I'm going to call it product page. And then go to the supplier page and copy everything. So Control A and C, back to the product page, and I'm going to paste everything over there. And now I'm going to use search and replace, searching for supplier and replacing it with product. So supplier with a capital S and product with a capital P. Make sure you've got this match case and you've got current document. We could go through replacing next, which would be the cautious way to do it, but I know that I can replace all, so I'll replace all. And 152 occurrences, so that saved a bit of time. Now we need to do the same for supply with a lowercase s at the beginning and a lowercase p at the end. Sorry, for product. Make sure you get that right. And that's been replaced. So now it's a case of going through these things that don't quite match. We haven't been able to get everything we wanted there. So we want product code, product description, and the product unit price as the columns. So I'll just go through here. product code, and we want to change the column header to code. We don't want a combined address, we want product description. And description. And for the last column, we'll have product unit price. And we'll have that aligned on the right. And we'll format it for 2 decimal places with comma separators in the thousands. So that's dealt with the grid. Then we've got to deal with the dialog. So let's have here, we want the product code. And the placeholder code. We want product description. With a description. We'll have the label as auto over the last column. In which we'll have the product unit price. And I'm going to get rid of the other text boxes. That, of course, should be a SF numeric text box with a placeholder of unit price. We'll add later the Syncfusion drop-down list for the supplier, but I just want to get this working without that added complication to start with. So that's the add edit, and we'll use exactly the same for the delete, except we'll make that false so the user can't change anything while they're deleting it. So that's the 2 dialog boxes, and then we've got some code to change. In the product save, we've got the wrong bits of data in here. Again, to save time, so I'm just changing the code there for the text that we need. Product update, I think I've got something for that too. Yeah, so let's get rid of that. That's fine. And for delete, it's the same as the update, but where we pass in product is archived. And that looks okay. We haven't got any errors down here, so relatively painless. Let's save it and just run it. Ah, I've missed something out on product service, line 25. Right, try again. So we've now got product. I should probably have that as products to be consistent, but it's showing our grid. Spelling mistake there, or typing mistake, but add, edit, and delete. Let's try adding one. So product code, product 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's a fitting, and it's £10. That looks good. Let's try editing it. Fittings. That looks good. Okay, I won't try deleting it yet because we might need that a little bit later. Fine, so let's close that. And now we want to add the Syncfusion drop-down list to the product page. So let's close these. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Right, so if we go to the top, we'll start off by putting the supplier in here, in the add dialog edit. To do this, we'll add a Syncfusion drop-down list and record the supplier ID from the drop-down list in the product supplier ID column. The drop-down list will display the supplier name, and to do this, we'll use a list of suppliers. So we need to do the following before we get round to putting the code in. We need to, at the beginning here, we need to, because we're going to be having a list of suppliers, we need to inject the supplier service. And as another aside, I've noticed that because we've got the imports with all the using Syncfusion Blazor items there, we don't need it on the individual pages. Just an aside. I've got the text here for the drop-down list. And you'll see this is quite complicated, and I did have quite a bit of trouble working out exactly what was needed here. But having done it, it looks fairly obvious. So we're having a data source of supplier. The T item is supplier with a capital S, and the T value is int. And I ran into difficulty there because I thought it was going to need to be int 32, but in fact it's just int. The text is the supplier ID, and we're binding it to the add edit product object product supplier ID. We're giving a float label of auto, and we're going to have a placeholder of select supplier, and it's going to be enabled to true. That's nothing too difficult about that bit. But the drop-down field list settings, the text is going to be supplier name, i.e. the supplier name is what we're going to be showing the user, but we're going to be storing the supplier ID back into this item here. So the value there needs to be supplier ID. Now to do that, as I said, we need to inject the supplier service here. We also need in here an IEnumerable list of suppliers. And on the initialization, we want to get that list of suppliers. And that, I think, is it. So let's have a look at the drop-down list here. We want to copy that and put it in the delete a product, but make it enabled false. Right, on the face of it, that looks fine. Save it and run it. I meant to update that to products. Maybe I'll do that next time. So I forgot to change that as well. Let's try adding a new one. So product A4, description A4 paper, unit price, say £4. Select a supplier, and you'll see here we've now got the list of suppliers. And if I save it, we've now can see by looking at the edit that we've got the supplier down there. It would be nice to have the supplier in this grid as well. So that's the thing we're going to be looking at next. Just to save me the pain of seeing that description there spelt all wrong. And the nav menu, same product instead of products, I'll just change that. Right, having satisfied myself that those are correct, what we need to do now is to add to the list of products the supplier name. And we're going to have to do that by tackling it, first of all, at the SQL level. So in the stored procedures for product list, if I right click and modify that, you'll see that we're selecting the product ID, the product code, the product description, and the product unit price from the product. Now we want the supplier name in there as well. And if one's familiar with SQL and joins, you can just write it in here. For the inexperienced, such as myself, there's an easier way of doing that, and that's if you go to View and create a new view. We're not going to be creating a new view. We'll just be using this little tool to give us the SQL code that we need. So we want product table and we want the supplier table. I just find it easier to do these things graphically sometimes. So supplier, product, and we've got a link between the product supplier ID and the supplier ID up here. And if you drag from product supplier ID up to supplier ID, it adds the join. If you right click on that, you can say whether we want all rows from the product or all rows from the supplier. We want all rows from the product, in that if a product hasn't got a supplier, we still want that product. And the bits we want are product ID, product code, product description, product unit price, whether it's archived, and we want the supplier name. So this bit of code here is the bit of code that we need. So if I copy that, go back to the SQL for the stored procedure, I can replace those two lines with the SQL that we've just got from this view that we are creating but not saving. So I'll delete that now. And this we want to execute. So that's fine. And just to check it, if we don't need to save that. If we go to our stored procedures again, go to product list and select execute and click OK. We've got our products here with a supplier name. So that's exactly what we want. Back in SQL, we do need to make a change to the product class, and we want to add in here the supplier name. So public string supplier name. We'll only ever be getting that. So save that. And back to the product page, we want another column. It's not going to be numerical, so I'll copy that one. And it is product.supplier name. Right, so let's save everything, run it. Products. And there we have our supplier. So all that looks good. So let's try adding another one. That looks very good, or at least what I expected. We aren't out of the woods yet. So far we haven't put any validation on any of our maintenance procedures for tax rates, suppliers or products, and perhaps we ought to do that. And just to give you an illustration, if I try adding another product, put in a price and put in a supplier, but I leave the description blank. If I save, you'll see we get an unhandled exception. If you get something like that, and I think depending on which browser you're using, you can go to these little three dots. This is in Edge. Go to More Tools and Developer Tools, and you can see on the right hand side, it could be different on your system, it gives a clue as to what the problem here is, and it's saying you cannot insert the value null into the column product description because I left the description blank, and we said that that was a required field. We couldn't allow nulls. So that's why we're getting the error. That's where you can see the error. The rest of it isn't that helpful, to me anyway, but the clue's in the top line. So we'll start in the next video, we'll add some validation to prevent this kind of thing happening. Thank you very much for watching this. As usual, the code is in the description below. If you've got any comments or questions, please put an entry in the comments and I'll see if I can answer them. Thank you very much.